Hello ladies and gents, and I hope you're all well. And you're going to be getting a crypt tour of the crypt of St Mary's, Wanstead, which is absolutely fascinating. But there was a slight change in plan. Instead of the young man leading our tour, it was a young lady. But I was very privileged to be allowed down here quickly on my own to film and photograph ready for the page. So just you and I are going to get a sneak peek into this interesting crypt all on our own. I will warn you, of course, there are human remains, coffins, and even a heart in a jar. And once we've done that, you'll rejoin us back in the crypt with our lovely tour guide, and she'll give us a fantastic tour. It was very, very interesting. So firstly, I'm going to show you some information inside the church about some of the people that we're going to see, and the vaults and that, etc. When this crypt was opened, and it is the foundation piece for this church, it runs under the church. A place inside, if you were a parishioner, would have cost you £105, which is roughly about £28,000 in today's money. If you were a non-parishioner, it would have cost you £120. So add that one up, it is a vast sum of money then and now, pretty much. This is the crypt. You're going to join me first inside the church, and then you'll join us back inside the crypt. So I hope you're all going to find it interesting. We'll be going into the vault in a minute, so I thought I'd show you some of its residents before we head in there. This is the Child-Tylney family. This is the slightly overweight man that we will be told about, and the Tylney family at the saloon at Wanstead. By old Nollikens, 1740, the earliest seated to the right, attended by his son John, right. His wife sits at the table opposite. Third son, Lieutenant Josiah, Royal Navy, whilst a daughter in blue stands behind. To the left is the infant James Long, with his father Sir Robert Long looking on. This is a caricature from Punch of the slightly overweight politician that we'll be told about. Very interesting. And this is the vault itself. There are 16 vaults inside there, and the Child's family gets the biggest, and the rector and rector's family, they're all piled in there. And here we go, down into the crypt. I've kindly been allowed down on my own to give you a good view thereof. So you'll get this bit where it's just you and I, and then we'll pick up with our tour guide. There's some very interesting information to tell us. So obviously we'll start with our tour guide back at the beginning. Apparently there's meant to have been, some say, a medieval well there. They've not been able to prove that. This vault was broken into. And the main feature of this tour is the old font from the church and a heart in a jar. That is a preserved human heart in a jar. So you're going to join me and our tour guide back at the beginning, and he'll give us the guided tour through.
Especially as a sort of slightly bigger group than we usually bring down. But we start here with the vault of William Curtis. Before I sort of say too much about him, I also like to kind of point out the condition of the vaults themselves, because we don't clean them or we haven't restored them or anything. This is pretty much its original condition. and you can still see here the pencil markings where they kind of drew lines to make sure that everything was the right size and everything was straight. You know, that was kind of quite common practice for graves and things, but usually they're outside, so they get weathered, the rain washes the pencil away, so you wouldn't usually be able to see this, but because it's so protected from the elements down here, you can still see it. You can also see here there's almost like a bit of a doorway. Originally those would have been open, and people could go in, sort of, you know, adding extra coffins, but also go in and pay their respects. And kind of the stories of people going in and sort of reading to their ancestors and stuff as well. But in, we think, kind of the late 1800s, they were bricked up, mostly to ward against vandals and body snatchers and that kind of thing. So we don't think anyone's been buried here since sort of the late 1800s. So William Curtis, his father owned a ship's biscuit company, which was based in Wapping. And so ship's biscuits, also known as hardtack, it was the main form of sustenance on long shipping journeys. And they supplied originally the Royal Navy with biscuits. And then William took over the business when he was 19, and he expanded it into supplying kind of shipping companies and whalers as well. And he made an absolute fortune doing it. So as a kind of marker of his wealth, when he died, he left £300,000 in cash.
Wow.
In that day's money. So if you think about how much £105 is worth today, it's maths I can't do, but he was very, very wealthy. He also held kind of a number of offices. So he was Lord Mayor of London. He's one of 3 Lord Mayors of London buried in the crypt. He was also Member of Parliament for the City of London for around 23 years as well. He was also apparently quite good friends of King George IV, but having friends in high places didn't really get him very far, so he was sort of ridiculed a lot in the press. They sort of made fun of his appearance. They kind of exaggerated his kind of nose, made it into a bulbous nose. Also, he was quite a large man, so they didn't kind of portray him very nicely in the press. They also, you can Google it, there's a sort of accounts of him debating in the House of Commons, and he wasn't a very eloquent speaker, so he used to trip over his words, and sort of had a bit of a lisp, so they said that his tongue was too big for his mouth. And so they sort of made fun of him because he didn't come from money, he kind of made his money, so they saw him as a bit of an upstart, and they nicknamed him because of his profession, Sir Billy Biscuit. So that's how we kind of affectionately refer to him now, but whether or not he would appreciate that is, don't know. But he was very well liked by the people that he employed, the people that he kind of lived kind of near. And he died in Ramsgate in 1829, and all of the shops shut in Ramsgate for an entire week to pay their respects to him. And his funeral procession went from Ramsgate to Canterbury, and the streets were just packed with people who came out to pay their respects and kind of throw flowers into the road and stuff when he did his funeral procession. So he was a very well-loved man by the people, and I think that's more important anyway. So that's the story of William Curtis. If you've got a torch, or you can borrow one of... Ooh, didn't realise that was on. You can borrow one of mine. Basically, if you put your torch in one hole and you look through a different hole, you'll be able to see into the vaults quite well. If you try and look through the same hole that you're pointing your torch in, you're just going to see light. So I wouldn't recommend that. But feel free to come and have a look.
But before we have a look into the vault, I thought I'd introduce you to the man and show the face of the man himself. And here he is, Billy Biscuit, Sir William Curtis, 1st Baronet, 1752 to 1829. And this portrait shows him as Lord Mayor of London, which post he served in 1796. He was an English merchant, banker and politician. Although he had a long political and business career, the two significantly intertwined. He is probably best known for the banquets he hosted, which were extremely lavish. And as we were told, he was heavily mocked. And here we see him as William Curtis, 1st Baronet, as Bonnie Billy by George Cruikshank, 1822. And here we see another one, Dr. Jukes, pumping the stomach of Sir William Curtis, as several other aldermen wait to be operated on, presenting the gross appetites of some civic dignitaries. And this is a coloured etching by W. Heath from 1824. And here we are, we see him in his old age, as a man in his 70s. Sir William Curtis, 1st Baronet, and this is by Sir Francis Leggatt Chantry, pencil 1827, so just 2 years before he died. And if he interests you, there is a book about him called Billy Biscuit, The Colourful Life and Times of Sir William Curtis. You can get this book from Amazon, it's available at the moment. Now, we'll have a look inside the vault, and what I should tell you before we look inside the vaults, the coffins were lead-lined and generally made up of what we'd think of as like a 3-piece coffin, so a wooden coffin lined in lead, and then within inside another coffin, normally covered in velvet with stud nails, so very heavy, very elaborate, and very expensive. Now we'll have a look inside the vault of Billy Biscuit and his family.
What are you looking at? I don't know. I think that's what I'm called to do.
Just because that one's quite low on the ground, so.
That's exclusively used it.
You showing yours and I suppose you do.
Is a vault that's been split into two. And in our vault and pew book kind of map that we've got, it is supposed to be split in two. So it's still in our plans that this was halved. It presumably was just because they didn't want to pay the full £125 for the vaults. They've gone halves, and these are the other 2 Lord Mayors of London buried down here, so it's very likely that they were friends and they kind of came to an agreement to share the vault. John Hopkins was a wholesale grocer, and he traded in spices from the Far East, so that's how he made his money. He was also captain of the Honourable Artillery Company, and when he stood down, it was Billy Biscuit, William Curtis, who took over from him. So you can see that these men, they all held the same jobs, they were in the same circles. They probably all had their rented pew upstairs in St Mary's as well. And then you have William Plummer, who was part of the Tyler and Brick Livery Company. He's one of 2 men only to become Lord Mayor of London from that livery company. It was kind of lower ranking, so they were less likely to kind of be voted in. So he had some kind of personal influence. Someone the other day said, or a lot of money to kind of pay his way to the top. I just said no comment to that. I can't comment on that. But I do find it quite ironic that he was part of the brick company when you see the state of the brickwork on his side of the vault. This is actually because it's modern. So from kind of here upwards, this is modern day cement. Here downwards is the original kind of lime. This is because it's been opened. We're not sure exactly when, but we do actually think it's sort of like kind of been a modern kind of official intervention, so we don't think it was broken into. We actually think that they had to open it up when they were doing something to do with the electrics in church, and they had to open access to this vault to kind of put some wiring in. And so then they've bricked it back up, but unfortunately they haven't done a very nice job of relaying the bricks. And this one, so I don't know if you guys actually want to kind of try and gather a bit more so you can see this plaque, because there's quite a lot of mistakes on here. So you can see here, Susanna, that the S is backwards.
Oh yeah.
Here, this P should be an uppercase P, but it's lowercase. and here plumber is spelt with a U, but here plumber is spelt with an O.
Oh boy.
So there's quite a lot of mistakes, and it kind of points to the literacy of the time, or lack of. And sometimes people ask, why are they different font types as well? But it's likely that Lady Susanna was buried here first, and then they've added William's name at a later date, and he's obviously paid more money to have a better person do his, because there's no mistakes, whereas on Susanna's there's quite a lot of mistakes. But you can see they've etched the lines kind of lightly into the stone rather than using pencil to make sure that everything's the right size. And I just think it's funny that they went through that much effort to make sure that was correct, and then proceeded to make so many other mistakes. But yeah, so feel free to have a look at it. You can use the stool, just don't hit your head if you stand on the stool.
It's the rubble from when they redid that part of the wall.
Yeah, presumably, yeah.
Gap there.
Picture through this hole.
And our two Lord Mayors of London, who decided to buy one vault and split it between the pair of them. And it was the Plummer vault that we were able to look into and see the coffins of Lady Susanna Plummer, with her first name, the S is spelt backwards, and Sir William Plummer, Knight. And I couldn't find any portraits of them as a couple, or even of him as Lord Mayor of London online. But it's turned out to be quite an interesting and slightly amusing one, this one, which you don't always get with with deaths and burials. But yeah, Sir William Plummer, he was elected Lord Mayor of London in 1781, and interestingly enough was one of London's youngest Lord Mayors, being only 21 years old at the time. He only served one term and was quite an unpopular mayor because he had a very rash temper, as we're going to see now. And this slightly amusing woodcut is titled The Battle of the Old Bailey. After proceedings at the Old Bailey, a dinner was being held, and as we can see, aldermen are guzzling around a table, at the head of which is the Lord Mayor. The city arms are on the wall behind him, and one of the aldermen, our man marked with the arrow, Alderman Plummer, has risen and aims a blow at the Lord Mayor. And this interesting little event occurred on the 1st of October 1779, and the fire escalated, and here we can see from this woodcut the magisterial bruises. Our man, Sir William Plummer, who was still an alderman at this time, I'm marking with the arrow now, well, he's got the Lord Mayor on the floor and has got him by the throat. The Lord Mayor is aiming a kick at his chin and has torn off Sir William Plummer's periwig, and other distressed people are trying to separate them in this fight that took place in the Old Bailey. And because I wasn't able to find any proper paintings or portraits of them, I've gone into a little bit more detail. And these are the burial entries for them. This is the burial entry for Lady Susanna Plummer, and she was buried on the 28th of October 1797. She's right at the bottom there, marked with the arrow. October the 28th, 1797, Susanna Plummer, alias Lady Plummer, and she would have been in her very late 30s to very early 40s at the time of her death, so quite young. And the burial entry for her husband. Burial entry for Sir William Plummer, and he lived from 1760 to 1812, and was buried on the 20th of April 1812, and we can see his burial entry there. So yeah, that's the Plumbers and our fighting aldermen. And the next mayor, we wasn't able to look into the Hopkins vault because the steps on which I was able to climb and look into the Plummer vault only went up to their vault. But this is our second man who split the vault with his presumably friend. This is Sir John Hopkins, who lived from 1715 to the 14th of October 1796. And he was buried on the 22nd of October 1796, aged 81. He married Anne Simpkins, and he was a wholesale greengrocer who imported spices from the Far East. In 1791, he was elected Lord Mayor of London. And this is just a smaller snippet from a larger picture or portrait I'm going to show you in a minute. And I can only presume that our man, Sir John Hopkins, is the man in blue. The other man is a doctor. And what makes me think our man is the man in blue is that he's got the finer clothes and much more elaborate lace to his cuffs and his neck. And this is the larger portrait from which it's taken. And this is a portrait of Sir John and Lady Hopkins with their children and Dr. Boutflower. So yeah, that's the Plumbers and the Hopkins. And I hope you found that one as amusing and interesting as I did.
See about the name. Did you see that?
Just looking for a thing that there is that many of what.
Oh, I've got a relative down here.
Oh, yeah, Middleton.
Middleton. Yeah.
You'll have to do your family tree. And
Yeah, to do that now, yeah.
Because we don't have any money,
Yeah.
So this vault here is also split, but whereas the other one was split kind of 50-50, this one is more split kind of 2/3 to 1/3. And also in the vault plans, this was never supposed to be split. So this was supposed to be George Bowles's vault kind of in its entirety. And it's almost like he's sublet it
Yeah, we nicked a bit.
to Boswell Middleton. And we don't know that much about Boswell, so I'll just make sure he doesn't drop his torch.
Yeah.
We don't know that much about Boswell Middleton. We know
Yeah,
that
best not know much about them.
he lived in Little Blake Hall, which was one of the kind of the mansions that would have been sort of between here and Leytonstone. He also married someone called Anne. Her name was Anne Middleton Holt. So when she got married, she became Anne Middleton, which I think is quite amusing. And when he died, she remarried someone else, so she's buried with her second husband. So Boswell was in there on his own. And if you look into that one, you'll see it's literally just big enough to slide the coffin in lengthways. They've just literally just siphoned off enough to give to him, which could be another reason why it's kind of not officially laid out in the plans of the vault. And then George Bowles, as I said at the beginning, he was church warden at the time that this church was built. And he lived in Grove Park, which is where the co-op is today on the High Street. Oh. And it was the second largest house in Wanstead after Wanstead House, so quite a big kind of influential family in Wanstead. And they were glass manufacturers by trade. They actually made mirrored glass. And again, that was a very lucrative business back in the Georgian period because everyone had big houses, big walls. So they wanted big mirrors to fill those walls. And it was very much a status symbol because mirrors were quite expensive. So if someone had a mirror in their house, you knew that they were wealthy. There is quite a bit of controversy surrounding this vault as well, not just the kind of undocumented split. That's that this vault is dated 1800, but George died in 1812. So this is likely to be the date that he purchased the vault, hopefully not the date he was buried, because he's alive. And our records actually suggest that he's buried with his father in his father's tomb. So Humphrey Bowles has a family vault in the graveyard that predates the crypt. We actually think we're like 95% sure that George is buried with Humphrey, which then begs the question, who is buried in here? And we haven't been able to verify that yet. We did actually think it might have been his niece. Her name was Anne Rushout, and she inherited his entire estate and his fortune when he died, because he died a bachelor, he didn't have any children. But I feel like I'm going to sneeze. It's gone. So she inherited the Grove estate, and she actually didn't like how the house looked, so she actually demolished it and rebuilt it to her own tastes. So we thought it might be her because she would have inherited also the right to be buried in here. But we recently found her burial records and she's not buried in Wanstead, so it's not her. So we don't know who it is. We're still looking, so if you want to come back in a couple of years, hopefully I'll be able to tell you who it is. I said on my tour at 3 o'clock, hopefully it isn't George, because I basically lied to the whole of Wanstead at this point, saying that it's not him. But hopefully one day we'll find out. I always like to point out there's some pencil markings here, dated 1922, so it's 103-year-old graffiti.
And the research into George Bowles, Esquire, and his niece, Lady Anne Rushout, has been absolutely bloody fascinating. I've found some really interesting stuff out about them. And here we can see him, the man himself, George Bowles, 1812, a drawing by Henry Bone. And one of the things I've found out about George Bowles is that although he was an extremely generous and kind man, genuinely so, he was vain. In his old age he had, as I read it, a horror and detestation of being depicted as a man of great age. And we can see from this drawing, when he would have been in his very early 80s, that this does not look like a man in his 80s, and the artist is very much flattered. But we can forgive him that for his generosity. And as we were said by our guide, the family made their money in glass manufacturing, and George was a very wealthy man indeed. George Bowles, 1732 to 1817, was a man of great cultivation and refinement, who inherited the grove at Wanstead in 1784. It already contained many fine pictures, and he added considerably to this, acquiring 49 paintings by Angelica Kauffmann. He also had an extensive library at the grove, which included French and Italian classics. George was largely responsible as well for the laying out of the parkland and the grounds around the grove, as we can see from these paintings by his niece, Lady Anne Rushout. The grounds were absolutely beautiful, and she was a very accomplished painter and watercolourist. She loved the grounds and kept them as they were, but she didn't like her uncle's house, as we will find out in a minute. But these paintings by Anne Rushout are lovely, and she was certainly accomplished. And our guide was quite right. He is not buried in that crypt, in that vault there. The only thing that she got wrong was the year he died. He died in 1817, not 1812. But bearing in mind she gave the entire tour without notes, that's not something I could do. Any lengthy tours I give, I have extensive notes, which you don't see me reading, but they're there. Yeah, he died in 1817. And this is the burial entry for George Bowles. He was born in 1732 and died on the 30th of April 1817. And as we can see from his burial entry here, he was buried on the 9th of May 1817, aged 85 years. And the rector, who performed his funeral, William Gilly, has made a footnote which says, was buried in family vault in churchyard. So he's not buried in that crypt, which leaves us with an interesting question. His niece, Lady Anne Rushout, who was really his sole heiress, inherited the Grove estate and the vast majority of his considerable fortune. And he left money to his other nieces and some friends and relatives, and a great deal of money for the use of the poor as well. And his niece had this really fine memorial put up to her uncle inside the church. And as we can see from his bust, he is once again not depicted as a man who died in his 85th year. He looks about 30 years old in this, so his niece stuck to his wishes and his slight vanity, and we can forgive him that for his generosity. And the lady covering her face with grief is his niece. The inscription is very long and very florid, and goes into all the fine attributes of his characteristic and personality. So yeah, it tells us he died ever lamented. And towards the end part of his life, and well, really for a good number of years, Lady Anne Rushout lived with her uncle, and she played hostess for him. So Yeah, he never married and he never had any children, and she the same, as we're going to discover when we get onto her in a minute. And here she is herself, Lady Anne Rushout, 1768 to 1849, and she's a very beautiful young lady. From a very early age, Anne was interested in blue-stocking literature, making several trips to Wales to visit the famous ladies of Llangollen, and keeping a commonplace book filled with feminist prose. It is not known if Anne was a lesbian, as her family attributed her strong aversion to marriage to the unfortunate death of her fiancé days before their wedding. The archives have been searched without success to corroborate this claim, but it seems likely that Anne came from a very liberal-minded and supportive family who propagated this story about the fiancé dying just days before the wedding to protect her reputation. Being homosexual was a criminal offence in those days. Whether that counted for lesbianism as well, I do not know, but for men being homosexual, it was a criminal offence. And from what I've read, quite a few different statements, it seems highly likely that she was a lesbian. She never married and she never had children. And she spent an awful lot of time around two other famous Georgian-era lesbians. And these are the ladies of Llangollen. And they often went around dressed as men. I mean, they've got skirts on in this painting, but they could often be seen wearing knee breeches and stockings like a man, and as we can see in this image, men's shoes and top hats. So, Anne spent a lot of time in their company, which is interesting. And here she is, the lady herself, Lady Anne Rushout. Here she is in her younger days with her sisters. Anne is on the left, with her sister Harriet in the centre, and her sister Elizabeth on the right. And they're all very beautiful young ladies, aren't they? Dressed beautifully for the Regency era. And as I said, Anne did not like her uncle's house, which when she inherited it was less than 50 years old. And considering that she then had the means to have the house pulled down and rebuilt to one that she liked, that is exactly what she did. And this is the house that she had rebuilt. There are no images that I can find of her uncle's house, but this is the house that she had rebuilt on the site, and the parkland was kept exactly as her uncle had it laid out. This is Wanstead Grove in circa 1829, from the long ornamental lake. What a lovely surroundings, eh? And once again, our tour guide was quite right. Lady Anne Rushout is not buried in that crypt, in that vault. This is from familysearch.org, and this is a notification of her obituary. Anne Rushout, Honourable, died on the 4th of April 1849, and this is from a Worcestershire newspaper. And she was buried in the church of St Peter and St Paul in Blockley in the Cotswold district of Gloucestershire. And this is her fine monument inside that church. And the inscription reads, "Sacred to the memory of the Honourable Anne Rushout, daughter of Lord Northwick, who died on the 4th of April 1849, universally beloved and regretted." And that is the story of an uncle and a niece who neither of them married and neither of them had children. I can't find any references whether her uncle was homosexual or not, so we can't say that, but there are a good few references saying that Lady Anne Rushout was more than likely a lesbian in an era when that would have been highly frowned upon. So her family being so open-minded was a blessing for her, really. And that's the interesting story of George Bowles and Lady Anne Rushout, and I hope you found it interesting. Back on with our tour.
Just be careful if there's a dip here as you come down.
Well, look, the unknown tomb. here. Oh, wow, that's a big one, isn't it? You see that thing?
Is it?
Oh, well,
Yeah. That's very good. You worked that out much quicker than I did.
1,500 centuries Why don't you know that?
So this one here, I don't know if you guys at the back can see, but this one is actually open. So we don't know exactly when this vault was opened, but this one, unlike the other one that's kind of been opened for kind of official reasons, I think this one has actually been broken into because the coffin has also been ripped open. We know kind of most of living history, or living memory I should say, that this has been open. We had a man who came down on a tour about 5 years ago. He was in his late 70s, early 80s, and he said, oh yeah, I remember this because when I was 7, I was a choir boy here, and as part of the kind of choir boy initiation, the older boys brought the younger boys down here, kind of in candlelight at night, got us to climb into this vault, and then blew out the candles and ran away, and left us in there in the dark to come out. And I was sort of like, oh no, I'm so sorry. So that's kind of how we know that it's been open. Pretty much even the kind of elderly members of our congregation, they all know that this is open, so it's definitely been open for like at least 100 years. We don't know what the reason was, but kind of potential reasons could be body snatchers, and there isn't a body inside this coffin, so that could be the reason, but just because there isn't a body there doesn't definitely mean it was body snatchers, because they could have removed the body at a later date, you know, for hygiene reasons and stuff. Or it could just be, I mean, just vandals, or they could have been looking for treasure, because quite often people were buried with rings and other jewellery and treasure and stuff. So it could be a number of reasons. I think it's quite interesting that they came all the way down here and targeted this one, because if it was me, and I keep saying that my husband is a police officer, so I probably shouldn't be saying this, but if it was me and I wanted to steal something, I'd probably choose one closer to the entrance and get in and out as quickly as possible. So, you know, why they've come all the way down here. But my kind of working theory as to why they picked this one is because this plaque is older than quite a lot of the others, as you've already deduced. It says 1788. Which obviously predates the crypt. The church was built in 1790. This one is also a lot more weathered than the others, so I think this has been outside, because if you look at the condition of the others, they've been so protected from the elements. This one's got sort of lichen and stuff on it. So it may be that people kind of thought that this one was special or older in some way and kind of targeted it that way. They maybe also have thought, because I think this one and that one are the only two where it's Roman numerals, they might have kind of mistakenly thought it was kind of older or kind of more grand or something. And so that might be why it was targeted, but that's all kind of complete speculation. I've got no proof whatsoever to back any of that up. It's also quite helpful, although kind of obviously not ideal for them, that their vault's been opened, because you can see into the vault, so you can sort of see the architecture. You can also see the grate at the back, which is where the air is coming from, and I can even see daylight as well. And the grate system, so if you go around the perimeter of the church, you'll see kind of equidistant, there are these grates kind of on the floor, and they're sort of like a periscope shape, so all of the rain comes down and goes straight into the ground, so no rain ever comes into the vaults. So it's very sort of cleverly designed, but we do sometimes get mice and frogs and spiders and things that come in through the grates. Down here we have a shield, which I think would probably have just been resting on one of the coffins. It's just been displaced. and we've just left it kind of where we found it so that we're not disturbing things any further. And then just behind you, so I'm about to blind you with a torch, I just like to point this one out, even though it's on this side of the crypt, because it's the only one that's got a woman's name and it doesn't have the man's name mentioned. Probably that's because her husband or the male of the family did purchase the vault, but he was probably one of the last to die, so they just didn't add his name. But it is quite interesting because all of the others have the man's name. Some of them are quite possessive, and they say his vault, even though there's family members in there. So it's quite unusual for this one to just have.
So how's this here? What it's saying, 5 years?
Yeah, so there's a lot
7
of children buried here
Yeah.
in this one as well. So you've got Charlie's aged 5, Mary Ann on this side, aged 7, and then there's also some pencil markings here where they were going to add someone else, but they never got round to doing the inscription.
Yeah.
And it says aged 3 years and 5 months. So it's quite a lot of small coffins in there if you want to have a look. That's the one also with the mouse in it. There's a dead mouse.
Oh.
But let's not all get fixated on the mouse. That's not why we're here. So whilst everyone's catching up, I'll just point this out. So this box here is actually a time capsule. So it was put in here in 2007 to mark the 800th anniversary of the parish of Wanstead. So there's been a church kind of on this site or thereabouts since 1207, and had a big kind of service and ceremony in 2007 to kind of mark the occasion, and there was sort of judges and mayors and all sorts of people came, and then people were invited to put stuff in the time capsule, and I think the classes at Wanstead Church School were all kind of invited to do so as well. I don't know exactly, I can't remember what's exactly in it, but I would suspect it's things like DVDs, CDs, probably a Nokia brick phone, like that kind of thing. And it's due to be opened in 2057, so 50 years after it was buried, to kind of give insight into what life was like. So I think it says we've buried the present for future study. I don't know who's going to be doing the future study or what's going to happen to it, but it'd be quite interesting to see in 2057 what happens. And here we've now got the two kind of double vaults. So we have the rector's vault and the rector's family vault, and then we've got the Child-Tylney vault here as well. And I'd just like to point out, so on the rector's vault, it's a singular possessive, so it's rector singular. So rector is like the priest in charge of the parish. And Samuel Glass was rector of Wanstead when this church was built, so presumably he thought this was going to be his vault, and only his vault. But unfortunately for him, subsequent rectors have also been buried here, so we thought, oh yeah, we'll have a piece of that. So these ones are actually quite crowded, and if you have a look, especially in this one, they're also kind of piled on top of each other. It's not very dignified, especially considering that they're the priests. And it's also a bit of a mix and match situation, so we know that there are rectors buried in the family side and there's family members buried in the rector side as well, so they didn't necessarily split them up. But again, Samuel Glass probably thought he was going to be buried in there alone and have some peace at last, and his family wouldn't be in there, but that's probably not what happened. And sort of down on the family vault, there's a plaque for the Gilly family, and William Gilly was rector of Wanstead at the time that Child-Tylney-Long and William Wellesley Pole lived in Wanstead House. So if you know the story of the angel and the cad, essentially Child-Tylney-Long, she was the richest commoner in England. She was the last remaining heiress of the East India Company, and she was a very, very wealthy woman. She chose to marry for love. She married William Wellesley Pole, who is nicknamed Wicked William for very good reason. He had a very bad gambling habit, spending habit. He was like obsessed with like buying curtains made of pure gold and stuff like that. And he got himself into a significant amount of debt. He spent Catherine's entire fortune and then some. And so what they had to do was they sold everything inside Wanstead House. They basically auctioned it all off. They still were in debt, so he wanted to cut down the trees to sell the timber. But he was told that none of the trees that could be seen from the house could be cut down. So he demolished the house and he sold it all, kind of all the building materials, literally brick by brick. Then he cut down the trees because the trees couldn't be seen from the house anymore because the house didn't exist. And even then, he was still in debt. So very, very bad man. But actually, William Giddy was his mentor because they thought if he had a priestly influence in his life, it might make him a better man. But that obviously didn't go to plan. And then on the theme of Wanstead House, we have the Child-Tylney family vault. So Josiah Child, who was the one who's got the big monument inside the church, he purchased the Wanstead estate, and there was a Tudor mansion there originally, and he knocked that down, and he built the Georgian Wanstead House that you saw on the board. He actually died about 100 years before this church was built. He died in 1699, and in fact everybody on here died before this church was built. Basically, Catherine's father, who was called James Long, gave the church this land for this church to be built on, and one of the conditions of that was that he had the first vault, because it was kind of closest to the altar, closest to God, that all of his family who were buried in the old church would be brought here. And that the monument was brought over as well. So when they built this St Mary's, they had to make sure that it was big enough to fit that monument. So he didn't ask for much, did he, really? So that was Josiah Child. He died before the building works were completed of the house, and his son Richard took over. And he also added the ornamental waters, which were very beautiful. They're still there today, but the water isn't there anymore. But it was like this elaborate kind of network of lakes and things with very pretty patterns, which kind of from the house you could see it, and it kind of was like an infinity lake. It kind of looked like it went on forever. And he married an Irish Countess of Tylney. Her name was Dorothy. But it was written into her inheritance laws that only Tylneys by name could inherit the money, because they had a lot of daughters. They didn't want to kind of dilute the fortune when they all got married. So what he did, Richard, when he married Dorothy, he took her name. So he became Richard Tylney, which you may think, woohoo, progression, feminism. But it was so that he could steal her money. So he then became Richard Tylney, and he was one of the wealthiest men in England because he already had the East India Company fortune, and now he had the Tylney fortune as well. And then the final person mentioned here is John Tylney, who was Richard's son. He died 6 years before this church was built. And it's rumoured that he was kind of the black sheep of the family. He was exiled to Italy, spent most of his time in Naples. And unfortunately, that's where he died. So he couldn't bring his body back because it wouldn't have made, the journey by sea. So what they did instead was they cut out his heart, put it in a jar, sent that back to Wanstead, and that came here into the crypt. And then in 1963, the Wanstead Historical Society came down here, and you'll see here there is some more modern day cement where they performed like a keyhole surgery in this wall, and they posted someone through that wall to take some photos, which I can show you at the end. I've got the photos from the inside of that vault. And whilst the man was in there taking pictures, he sort of kind of kicked over a jar, and he thought, oh, what's that? And he kind of picked it up and he brought it out for further inspection. And when they bricked the crypt back up, they didn't put the jar back. So here is the jar containing the heart of John Tylney. Yes, way. So, and it's been there kind of ever since. It actually used to be down here, but we've put it there so that people can see it. And I do have, if you're not too squeamish, a close-up photo of what it looks like inside the jar. But yeah, so on that bombshell, that's kind of the end of the tour. But feel free to come up and have a closer look at the jars. Please don't knock it over because I'll be in a lot of trouble. And also come and have a look inside the rector's vault and stuff. We do have, it's new for this year, a camera which shows you the inside of this vault, because as I said, this is a double vault. So if you put your torch in those holes, you wouldn't see anything. It's just empty space. So I'll turn the camera on so that you can have a look inside. But I've also got the photos that they took in the 60s, so you can kind of compare kind of the live picture to these. So I'll do that whilst you guys go and have a look.
It's all right.
You want to come down there? Jake, yeah, I'm going back this way.
My great aunt cooks stuffed hearts. I'm never eating one of those again after seeing this. Oh, that is pretty good.
Yeah, so that's the heart. Okay. You'll see, and then this here. So this is the inside of this vault.
Right.
And this is, we think this is the coffin of Josiah Child, because it's like quite old. And you can see, so this was originally buried underground, so it's disintegrated a lot more than the ones that you've been able to see. So this is the skull, and I think this might be his pelvis as well, I was looking up. And you can see that here. So that's the skull.
So this is what the camera's showing?
Yeah, so yes. Because someone came down on a tour and said, oh yeah, I've got pictures of the inside of this vault. And we were like, no, you don't. And he was like, yeah, no, I do. And then he showed us these and we were like, oh wow, no, you do, okay.
Fair enough.
And then you can see this one as well is also inside. It's just this corner here is showing this coffin. So we think this is the coffin of Richard Tilney, because it's quite elaborate and kind of pretty compared to the others. So. Oh, sorry.
Situation. So that's
Yeah. You can see again, this one is kind of broken.
This is the child vault.
I think this is Richard's coffin, because it's quite elaborate. And then this here on the screen is showing you the current
do you want to get
live streaming.
Right.
So you can see here, this is the head, the skull. It was actually for medical science. They would sell them to hospitals and things. Yeah, so so it's like
Never eaten stuffed hearts again after seeing that.
Human anatomy.
And that's the font from the medieval church.
And the child, and as it would later become, Tylney-Long family. What a family and what a story. And this is the head of that family who built all the wealth. Sir Josiah Child, first Baronet Child of Wanstead, MP, was an English economist, a merchant and politician. He was an economist, proponent of mercantilism, and governor of the East India Company. He led the company into the Anglo-Mughal War, which didn't go too well for them. Child lost the war with Aurangzeb, 6th Mughal Emperor of India, which took place between 1688 and 1690. Aurangzeb, however, didn't take any punitive action against the company and restored its trading privileges for a massive indemnity and promises of better conduct in the future. He, Aurangzeb, graciously agreed to the restoration of the East India Company's trading privileges and the withdrawal of his troops. And here we can see Sir Josiah Child in this image, on his knees with his head bowed, apologising to Emperor Aurangzeb for the company's bad behaviour. An old Wanstead house. This is the old Tudor house. Sir Josiah Child wanted to leave his mark by establishing a family seat that would proclaim his incredible success. In 1673 he paid £11,500 for the manor at Wanstead in Essex, a scenic estate comprising of rolling hills, forests and lakes, with the River Roding flowing through it. In his final years he devoted his time to remodelling his gardens, planting avenues of trees and creating ornamental lakes. He did start the demolition of the old Tudor house that we can see here, but he didn't live to see that through, or live to see the building of the new house. And what we have to remember is everyone in that vault didn't originally start off being in that vault. They were all buried in the old medieval church. And this is the burial entry for Sir Josiah Child from the old medieval church. 1699, Sir Josiah Child, Baronet, was buried. He died on the 22nd day of June in the 69th year of his age, which wasn't a bad age for those days. And this is that very medieval church that they were all buried in, and this lovely painting is by Joseph Mallord William Turner. These paintings were done right before the old church was pulled down, so luckily we get to see it. And when the old church was pulled down, they very carefully removed this impressive and massive monument to Sir Josiah Child and put it up in the new church. And as we were told, the new church had to be built tall or big enough to accommodate this monument, and it is massive. And Sir Josiah Child was succeeded by Richard Child, 1st Earl Tylney, 1680 to March 1750. He was an English politician who sat in the House of Commons between 1708 and 1734. Initially a Tory, he switched to supporting the Whigs after 1715. He is remembered chiefly as the builder of the now long demolished princely mansion at Wanstead House. He died in March 1750, aged 70, at Aix-en-Provence in France. His body was brought back home and buried in that old medieval church on the 29th of May 1750 at Wanstead. On the Earl's death in March 1750, he was succeeded by his eldest surviving son, John, who had also adopted the surname of Tylney by private act of Parliament. And here we see Richard Child, and he and his descendants took on the name Tylney for a reason. But this is the Palladian Wanstead House in 1771, commissioned in 1715 by Sir Richard Child from a design by Colin Campbell. By the time of its completion in 1722, Child had been created 1st Viscount Castlemaine, and in 1731 he was created Earl Tylney. And the reason that they changed their name we're going to see in a minute. Here's a lovely painting of the old house and grounds. And this is why they changed their name. In 1730, Child's wife, Dorothy Glynn, inherited the Tylney estates in Hampshire from her cousin, Anne Tylney, who died in 1729. Under a clause, the Tylney inheritance had to remain in the Tylney family. So by Act of Parliament, Richard and his descendants took on the surname of Tylney, basically so he and they could inherit this lady's wealth. And here she is, Dorothy Glynn. And he was succeeded by his son, John Tylney, 2nd Earl Tylney. And he is the young man in this image who's standing up with his arm on the chair, and the man seated is his father. And in the crypt, this is the man whose heart is in a jar. John Tylney, 2nd Earl Tylney, 1712 to the 17th of September 1784, was an English aristocrat and member of Parliament who moved to Italy after a homosexual scandal. That's why he was in exile, because don't forget, homosexuality was a criminal offence in those days. Tilney died on the 17th of September 1784 in Naples. His heir was his nephew, James Tilney-Long. In 1765, though, he was the larger seated figure, pointed with the arrow here, included in a caricature painting by Thomas Patch. Patch was another Englishman living abroad. He had left Rome for Florence after he had been banished for a scandal based on his homosexuality. And here he is in a more close-up image, John Tilney. And he was succeeded by his nephew, Sir James Tilney-Long, who in this image is the infant child in a dress. I mean, don't forget, in those days, boys up until the age of 5 or 6 were basically pretty much dressed the same as girls. Sir James Tilney-Long, 7th Baronet, 1736 to the 28th of November 1794, was an English politician who sat in the House of Commons for 32 years, from 1762 to 1794, the eldest son of Sir Robert Long, 6th Baronet, and his wife Emma Child, the lady seated in the chair. His only son, also called James, was born 2 months before his father's death and became the 8th Baronet. A sickly child, he died on the 14th of September 1805, just short of his 11th birthday, and the great estates of the Long, Child and Tilney families devolved chiefly onto the eldest of the 7 baronets' 3 daughters, Catherine. The baronetcy became extinct, and Catherine's marriage to spendthrift, high-stakes gambler and adulterer, William Pole Tilney-Long Wellesley, who is the nephew of the Duke of Wellington, by the way, 4th Earl of Mornington, saw the destruction of Wanstead House. And here they are, the unhappy couple themselves. Catherine Tilney-Long by an unknown artist, and the man known as Wicked William, William Pole Tilney-Long Wellesley, who is the nephew of the Duke of Wellington. Catherine Tilney-Long, 2nd of October 1789 to the 12th of September 1825, was a British heiress and believed to have been the richest commoner in England at the time. Her suitors included the Duke of Clarence, later King William IV, who was keen to pay off his great debts. She eventually chose, unfortunately for her, William Wellesley Pole, who was born in 1788, who on the 14th of January 1812 assumed the additional surname of Tilney-Long, changing his name by royal licence. The couple married on the 14th of March 1812, but his extravagance, arrogance and cruelty meant that the marriage was an exceedingly unhappy one. Catherine implied in a letter to her sisters that her husband had given her a venereal disease. He basically left her for another woman who he would later marry after her death, once of course changing his name to inherit all her wealth. She died at the age of 35 in Richmond in Surrey, leaving their children, William, James and Victoria, in the care of her 2 unmarried sisters, Dorothy and Emma. And the Duke of Wellington had to get involved with this one, because the Wicked William, he wanted guardianship of his children, particularly their son William, who inherited all the wealth from his mother. But the Duke of Wellington, this Wicked William's own uncle, got involved and put a stop to it. So he didn't get his hands on the boy's wealth, but he did get his hands on all the wealth of his wife. And it was through him that the man that indulged in such things as gold curtains and wasted millions or billions in today's money, that Wanstead House was taken down stone by stone and sold off. Even with all that wealth, it still didn't pay off all of his debts. And that is the Child-Tylney-Long family. And we should go back on with our tour.
Try and understand more about, what caused it.
The rector's vault, one that's all piled up. People do.
Thanks.
Have a heart for him, don't you?
Yeah.
I just don't believe the middle of the name down there. You pop up everywhere.
So did you see? So this is
And the rector's vault. when newly constructed, this man here, the Reverend Samuel Glass, would have expected himself to be the sole resident of the rector's vault, but as we saw when we peeked in, and as we were told by our tour guide, far more people have been piled in on top of him than he would have expected or found decent. And indeed, some of those people aren't even rectors, or, as with the rector's family vault, aren't even direct members of a rector's family. But that's that. And here we see the first occupant of the rector's vault, the Reverend Samuel Glass, and he was born in 1735 and died in 1812. Reverend Samuel Glass, Doctor of Divinity, was an English cleric and Fellow of the Royal Society. He was of high church views. In 1782 he became vicar at Epsom in Surrey, and 4 years later, in 1786, he was made rector of St Mary's Church in Wanstead in Essex. And indeed, Reverend Glass here lived through an interesting period regarding our churches, as we're going to see in a minute. But in 1764, Glass became a Fellow of the Royal Society, and in 1772, chaplain in ordinary to King George III. That's the king that went mad, by the way. Reverend Samuel Glass died at his home at 10 Sackville Street in London on the 27th of April 1812, aged 79 years, which was a good age for those days. And as I say, regarding our churches, he lived through an interesting period, because when he was made rector at Wanstead in 1786, it would have been as rector of the old original medieval church, which we can see here. That church was built in around the year 1208. But by the time of Reverend Glass's day, it had become very dilapidated and wasn't big enough for a rapidly growing congregation. So it was decided to pull it down and build a new church just a little further on. Then we're going to see that in a minute. But luckily, just before it was pulled down, the very famous nowadays, particularly, painter Joseph Mallord William Turner was brought in to do this fine painting of the old church. That was pulled down and replaced just a little further on with this one, the current St Mary's Church at Wanstead. And Reverend Glass would have seen the pulling down of the old church, and indeed with this new one, he was the first rector of this church, and we can see it here when it was newly put up. A new church, but surrounded by its old graveyard, as we can see. And Reverend Glass remained rector of this parish until his death, but interestingly, when it came to everyday working class ordinary people, he had a curate performing the church services and baptisms, marriages and burials. But if you look through the register, it's quite interesting. When someone wealthy, rich or important died, Reverend Glass would travel in from London and perform those ceremonies and services himself. And my research, I was able to find out who Reverend Glass's wife was. Hannah Glass, and she was the first occupant of the rector's family vault. And Reverend Glass's wife Hannah, she was buried on the 21st of September 1811. You can see her burial entry right at the bottom there, and she was the first resident of the rector's family vault. And Reverend Glass himself, he was the first resident of the rector's vault, and as we were told, would have expected to be the sole resident, but it turned out very differently. He only outlived his wife by 8 months, and we can see his burial entry here. Samuel Glass, D.D., rector, and he was buried on the 5th of May 1812, aged 79 years. And that's the Reverend Samuel Glass, who has far more people piled in on top of him than he would have expected. And before we end off our tour, I'll show you inside some of the vaults that we weren't able to cover in our guided tour. So we'll have a look inside some of those, shall we?
So did you see? So this is the photo.
And it's normally locked, so you can prevent people from coming.
Yeah, so today's our last day of tours, so now it's going to be bricked up.
I'm glad I got to see it, because I normally come to the cemetery, so it's good to see underneath it.
Yeah.
There's a child in there. Did you want to have a look there?
Are these candles like old candles?
Thomas Hodgson
I'd
Esquire,
say I would
vault,
date them at probably like
February the 3rd, 1807.
So pretty old.
Charles Samuel Hodgson died August the 1st, 1808, aged 6 months. And Susanna Steelan died December the 30th, 1819, aged 48.
He recorded himself and it's all lit up in candles.
That's
It's very
so cool.
atmospheric, and I'd say that was probably in like 1998 when he took that video. But when now we do, we just use the rope lights because you know, so don't set anyone on fire. Or
That would be cool though, with the lights.
yeah.
We've seen George Bowles, haven't we? Joshua Knowles, Esquire. His vault, 1816. And this is going to be bricked back up soon, so that's really our main opportunity to have seen inside. Very interesting. Macabre, but interesting. Peter Kenyon Esquire, his vault, 1817. Oh, that one's...
And that concludes our tour of the crypt at St Mary's, Wanstead, and I hope you all found it interesting. Join me again tomorrow evening for part of our Halloween 3-day special. We'll be having a ghost hunt at the churchyard at several of the graves, and above this vault at the air vent or opening down into the Child family vault. So if that's your thing, I'll catch you all tomorrow.